Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
And listeners, welcome back to the Farm for Profit Podcast. We got Tanner and Corey sitting here. We haven't done a full intro in a while. Do you feel like this is old school? We're going back? Or do you like the way
maybe
we
a
just
little.
kind of went in?
Yeah, we haven't. Normally, we've just been diving in lately, haven't we?
It's like we're kind of stubborn and stuck in our ways.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, nice lead in there.
Uh-huh.
Do.
Is your dad stubborn?
Yeah, he can be.
Sure.
Well, I should say this. He's probably less stubborn than most farmers. But
Okay.
I think every farmer's got a little bit of stubborn in him.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's the same way. My dad's not stubborn as you would think of stubborn and mean. More just, I've done it this way. This is the way it's going to continue to happen.
Yep.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to attack more than just stubborn farmers. But we've had this guest on before. Our pleasure, though, to meet him in person and bring him into the new studio here in Slater. Andy Bobcaygeon Junkin. He is originally from Bobcaygeon, Ontario. And we learned there that he had a cowboy bar, and that's where he got his nickname.
No, the bar was named after me.
Oh, the bar was named after you.
Yeah. Well, we in college, the Italian. It's a long story, but I was a classic farm boy goes to college story.
Yeah.
And like my first week at school, we had a run-in with the law, and they got at me for using a slingshot on squirrels, and I was like, "Why the hell aren't you guys using your guns to shoot these damn squirrels? There's squirrels everywhere."
Yeah.
And I was just that classic farm boy goes to college
Yeah.
story, and eventually one thing led to another, and I got a country bar named after me, and went from when they renamed the country bar, they called it Cowboys initially, and they had 50 people a night going. And I made the joke, well, why don't you just have my friends come here and drink? And then, so the guy said, well, let's do that. And this is when I started doing what I'm doing. And the next weekend when we renamed it was 700 people showed up.
Wow.
And so we had, for the first couple of years I was doing what I'm doing now, I was doing that, and then I got into milking water buffaloes, which is a contract. I went full-time into Saving Family Farms. And about 6 months full-time into that, that's a great way to lose your shirt. And so I started milking water buffaloes for a dairy farmer who just had 400 cow dairy, and then he got into a side venture of milking 70 water buffalo. And that's how stubborn.farm got started 16 years ago. So
that's what we're here to talk about. Your company is www.stubborn.farm. Like I said, you've been on to talk with our listeners before.
Sure.
But you just wrote your 7th book, Stubborn. That's all it's titled, is Stubborn.
That's it. And I mean, the thing is that there is no, I don't know about you guys when you went to college. I know I barely read the textbooks I was supposed to read when I was at agriculture college. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends haven't read many books since, right? Mm-hmm. I try to read 2 books a week. Wow. I get up at 4 o'clock every morning and read 75 pages before I have breakfast. But the thing is that there's no money to be made in writing books for farmers. And but the thing is that I just felt it was a book that had to be read, it had to be written, and it covers a lot of the things I've learned the last 16 years. And just it's counterintuitive, but it's just common sense. And it's a whole different approach to farm management and farm succession. So that's why we're here today.
So were all the other books on the same topic, or?
They were on the similar talk, but they didn't hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
And my first book was called Farm Succession Shouldn't Be Done in the Funeral Home. Back when I thought I knew it all about succession planning, that was 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And what happened as a result was everybody that had a father or father-in-law and the sons and daughters are in their 40s or 50s, they couldn't get a succession deal done. I was the guy from Canada that they called in after they had 2 or 3 mediators or succession planning so-called experts, and they couldn't get a deal done, and Grandpa was on his deathbed, and I was the guy that got called out to 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces. And that's my first book, and I've written other books since, but the topics I talk about in Stubborn is never been discussed before, but it's the root issues that causes family farmers to fall apart. Mm-hmm. And I'm giving away the book for free. So just go to stubborn.farm, www.stubborn.farm, and you can just listen to the audiobook for free. I don't care about making money off it, but I do care about changing the probability of anybody's farm and family still farming together in 30 years' time. Yeah.
So I'm going to try something, Corey, that my wife has suggested we do.
Oh, boy.
She suggested that we let the listeners know who this episode's going to apply to before we get there. So as you kind of know the direction of conversation, we're going to go today, Andy. What's your, or should we be calling you Cajun?
Everybody calls me Cajun.
We'll call you Cajun. So who do you think needs to listen to this episode today?
77% of family farms do not have a succession plan. Now, that doesn't mean there hasn't been, by the time somebody's been farming with their parents for 10 years or so, there definitely has been a succession planner out to the farm. What that statistic means is that 77% of the time, that succession planner leaves that farm frustrated, saying this family's too damn stubborn. And if you cannot sit down and make little tweaks to the efficiency of your farm, squeezing out 10% here and there, how in the heck, without people having that I'm smarter than you attitude, you don't know what you're talking about? How the heck are you supposed to have a conversation where you're considered equals and talk about where the farm's going to be in 10 years' time? And so that's what I'm really concerned about is looking at the fundamentals of how you work together as a family, how you listen to each other instead of talking over top of each other. How do you get rid of the narcissism that happens within the culture of family farms? And more importantly, how do you get rid of that I'm smarter than you attitude and start making smarter decisions together? And that's what this book's all about. And then if you can get those fundamentals in place over a couple of years, sitting down with your family to do succession planning, it's a couple-hour conversation, not World War III.
And we've got listeners that aren't farmers, but I'm sure that statistic is the same for even businesses, plumbers.
Yeah, a lot of small businesses, that don't run, corporate style where they have the next person already being groomed.
Yeah, for a CEO role or whichever it is. Because I just met an HVAC guy that was working on our building, and kind of the same thing. Wasn't a big plan in place, and all of a sudden he's tapped on the shoulders.
I'm surprised by how many small business owners are going through the same thing. And I think it's the demographic issues there. The biggest change we've had in agriculture, what do you think from a technology standpoint? I think we talked about this last time I was here, was the biggest change we've had in technology and farming isn't combines or the fact we have robotic milkers or GMO technology. It's the fact that farmers are living longer. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing for family-owned businesses. Basically, there's a lot of – I just got off the phone with the lady that's 67, and there isn't a succession plan in place. And both her parents are still alive. Mm-hmm. And she's got 4 siblings, 3 are farming. And there's no plan. And how the heck are you supposed to plan your future if you're walking on quicksand? And now the grandkids are getting involved. And what's their future? Why would they want to get involved if nobody knows what the heck the future is?
Right. It's kind of the farmer's just way. Like, I think we're just groomed throughout our lives that we can't control the weather, we can't do this, and we just take it as it comes. But yet this is something that we can control.
And also, historically, that pool, the value of those assets hasn't been as expensive. If you're talking 40 years ago,
sure,
and you have, at that time, maybe 2 kids back at the farm, maybe not. That could have been the era of they sent everybody off to college because farming wasn't great.
Yep.
And you came back to a $500,000 farm. And a $500,000 farm was split up plus the cash to another kid. You're talking about $100,000 a piece, if you got a family of 5 or whatever it is. Now we're talking millions of dollars, and we're seeing a lot more education because of social media, YouTube. These non-farming heirs also know that there's value in these assets. So there's a lot more complicated conversations. But is that a difference that we have in generations right now when it comes to succession planning, or what are you seeing?
I think that the biggest greed is a factor, but I think it's like number 10. And everybody says it's number 1.
Really?
I really do believe the greed factor. Let me go off on a tangent just for a second. I had a friend, her name's, we'll call her Molly. Her name's not Molly, but her boyfriend's name was Jack. We'll call him Jack anyways. And she was 36, and they had been dating for 7 years. And then after 2 years of them dating, she moved in with him, right? And he had bought the house a couple years before. So she basically contributed to the house payments. And he had a business on the side, and he had some wealth. His family was wealthy. But basically, she had been hinting at a ring as soon as she moved into the house with him, right? And after 7 years of there not being an engagement ring, she was confused. Like, where are we going with things?
Right.
And she put in a lot in the relationship, and she wondered, was she not just good enough? And why wouldn't he commit? And more importantly, she was 36. She wanted to have kids.
Yeah.
Right?
So her internal clock, or felt like she was ticking. Yep.
And her father, they initially liked the guy. They really liked him, right? And it was going good. But her father found out that he made a joke at a stag party when he was asked why doesn't he get engaged to that girl? Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free?
Oh.
And what would if you were the father of this girl? What would your reaction be?
Not very pleasant.
Let me tell you, she was not trashy, or she was a friend of mine. She's a really upstanding girl.
Yep.
But what, Tanner? How would you feel in that situation? What would you do?
I was just putting in my brain for how probably some of our listeners feel working for their parents or
That's
working
exactly
for a family
how
member.
They feel resentment and anger because they have put so much in this operation, and yet they're not good enough to be a partner. There's no recognition, and I think the recognition is a huge thing. And this insecurity, the feeling that you're walking on quicksand. Like, there's a lot of folks that are in their 40s, and now their kids are teenagers, and they have these kids leading these 4-H calves and just loving farming.
Yep.
And they're like, is this child abuse for me to encourage this kid to be interested in farming when we don't know what our future is? Like, the way things are going, it's not going to be, at the latest, it's probably going to be 55, maybe in their 60s, until we get this all sorted out, because Dad refuses to talk about this. And Dad's promised me one thing, but Mom says something different. She wants to give all my siblings the same thing, right? She wants to treat us all equally. I had a buddy back in Ontario, and this is 7 years ago, just before I left for America. And he had taken over the farm in 2003. He had come home. His dad had cancer. He was a millwright. He came home, took over the business. They had a 1,000-acre operation, sand farm, just terrible land, right? But that land went from 3,000 acre to 20,000 acre over that 20-year period.
Wow.
And what had happened was that he got a special niche market. I'm not going to get into the details so nobody can guess who it is. But the thing is, he got into a specialty that only he could do, and he worked his butt off to build that specialty. They had 3,000 acres, and it was pretty much all paid for, right? He had taken his family out of debt, growing that operation, and all his father would do would buy a farm that came up and split it between his 4 kids. And the 3 kids, other kids, were not involved in the farm. And his dad's attitude was, well, I hire Jose, I pay him, and I pay my son $5 more an hour than Jose. He deserves nothing.
That's the compensation.
That's the compensation. Now, my buddy slept in a cot in that shop for 6 weeks of harvest, did not see his kids but 3 times during harvest, because he had to keep, I'm not going to get into the specialty of the niche market, but it was intense. No respect. And the issue was that Dad did not respect him as an equal. He looked at him as an employee or a slave.
Yeah.
And I don't think we talk about indentured labor enough in agriculture, but we have a serious issue with slavery.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a lot of men and women, they work for, back during the Civil War, before the Civil War, the slave owners would say, hey, I give my slaves roast beef at Christmas. Right? Mm-hmm. A lot of farm owners will say, I give my kids this, I give them that. You don't give them the respect. And I don't think folks realize that. And I don't think folks realize how it is tearing apart like my friend that had that, he had a lot of get up and go in his 20s. But in his 30s and 40s, he started to lose that. And you take communism, we have an issue with the mindset of communism in Canadian and American agriculture today. And this is why. Is back in the 70s, what was the difference between America and Russia? Corey, you didn't read my book, so you can.
I didn't read your book, and I wasn't alive in the 70s, so I got to turn to the history buff over here.
Well, even then, we didn't have communism.
Yeah.
What the thing is, what makes America is capitalism, right? And the thing is that Russian farmer, he got paid the same wage, and he didn't have any ownership in the operation, so he didn't make the sacrifices in order to keep things going, right? He just went home whenever his shift was done, and his care factor went out the window. Mm-hmm. It was only American farmers have excelled compared to Russian farmers because of the sense of ownership, mm-hmm. right? And we have men and women that are even in their 60s and 60s that have no ownership. That lady I just got off the phone with, she doesn't own the truck she drives. She doesn't own the house she lives in. She has no shares in the corporation. It's all in Dad's name. Mm-hmm. And I respect that, farmers want to keep ownership of the farm, probably longer than they want to retain their left testicle. I think the thing is that they would rather give up their left testicle than ownership of the home farm because that's the center of their identity, right? And I'm fine with that. But the thing is, we got to learn how to share. And we talk about corporate farms around succession planning. And, we got fighting over shares. And the issue is we got to learn how to share as far as ownership of shares in the farm instead of splitting up a pie at somebody's funeral. To me, it makes sense as soon as the kid comes home, there's got to be a 3 or 5 year window that they've got to earn the opportunity. Just the same as Steve Jobs, when he founded Apple Computers, he didn't say to his managers, you work for me for 30 years, I'll be nice to you in my funeral. They put their shoulder into growing. I mean, if he did that, he'd be still operating Apple Computers out of a garage.
Yep.
But he gave it after he found good managers that had potential. He recognized that and gave them share options and saying, hey, if you work for me over the next 30 years, you put your shoulder into growing this business, you can earn percentage of the growth.
Yep.
To me, that's the way we got to do it with family farms. I'm not saying that after 3 years that you should give any equity to your son and daughter. But there should be an understanding that, hey, for every 1,000 hours I put into this operation, what percentage of ownership of the growth of this farm going forward am I earning? And how much is going to my sister in California that's not going to set foot on the farm for the next 30 years? And am I working to grow this farm for my kids? Or am I working for the next 30 years so my sister can buy a really nice cruise in Alaska? And to me, that just makes sense. And the first step, I think, so I mean, we can get into that, but I think the thing is, what would make sense to me is for every family farm to have a performance review where they sit down with their sons and daughters. I call it the 9,000 hour rule. So 9,000 hours is basically the average farmer works about 3,000 hours a year. Okay. During the February, you're not working as many hours as in May. Mm-hmm. Over the course of the year, you're working about 3,000 hours. And if you're not, then we got to have a conversation. How serious are you about being this tall beyond the ride?
Yeah.
Right. But every month, to me, it makes sense to do a performance review. And then you just simply make one change as a result of the performance review. Like I'll give you, here's a 10-point performance review. Here's the first page. But basically, what are a couple things there? Like what would be an example there, guys, is of a couple things that I've got there.
Were you a joy to work with? That's a damn good question. Because just because you were there doesn't mean that you were pleasant.
Who wants to spend 30 years building up a farm to share it for the next 30 years working with a jerk?
Right.
It's been hard to spend 4.5 years with Corey.
Do you want me just to read through
Yeah,
these?
just read through a few
Yeah,
of
you
them.
got 7 of them. We might as well. I mean, because this is free, right? You're giving your stuff
Yeah.
away. Were you joy to work with? And then you're grading it on a scale of from A to F. So
Yeah.
absolutely to terrible, or you could do 1 to 10, I'm sure, or whatever.
Yeah.
Rate your ability to think outside the box and bring quality ideas to the table.
Whether those ideas are welcomed or not.
Yeah. Do you listen or just talk? Can you make decisions with your partners? Okay, that's a good one. Are you conforming to the farm's cultural values or defying them?
Probably a lot of farms need to determine
Yep.
what their values are.
Are you trying to follow through on personal improvement goals?
Mm-hmm.
Accountability. Do you always follow through on what you said that you would do?
Mm-hmm.
And are you good at handling crucial situations? So
Crucial conversations.
Conversations.
Oh, wow.
Which is, can you kind of handle conflict,
Right.
Right. Okay.
right?
See, that's why I didn't read the book. I can't
No,
read.
that-
Yeah,
that-
rule
that's
number
all.
8. Rule number 8. Have you done your reading practice?
But the thing overall is, to me, it would make sense for a young farmer to go through that. They're never going to get a perfect score.
And
Right.
they shouldn't.
No, but I think the thing is, if you can see that you're always improving, I think esteem is not talked about enough. The importance of having self-confidence is not talked about enough in agriculture. And there's a lot of what's what we call fragile narcissists, where a lot of sons and daughters work their butts off, not for a wage, not for equity, but to earn dad's respect.
Yeah.
And too often, dad might fly off the handle about something, but deep down, he's deeply proud of his daughter. But he doesn't tell that to her enough.
Yeah.
And we're just a different breed of people. We're stubborn,
Yeah.
right? But what is important is there's got to be a point in time where you can see yourself in the mirror for who you really are, right? And you can see overall, I'm doing a decent job in most of these areas. But there's a couple areas I need to improve on. And to me, what makes sense is once a month to give a critical feedback from a parent as to how can I take my performance from a bad habit and to turn it into a good habit. You know, because every challenge you have in life, you either have an incorrect belief, like I can show up to work anytime I want because they're not going to fire me. That might be an incorrect belief. I am sure there's no farmers out there that ever know their brother or sibling like that, right?
Yeah.
A character flaw, like being passive aggressive, right? Or a skill deficiency, right? Just not knowing how to use QuickBooks,
Yep.
right? But every month, if we can identify one of those areas and identify, okay, over the next month, we want to turn this from weakness into a strength, and we want this habit to stick, right? And if we measure that, and you continue to do that, and you have 24 of those performance reviews, and by and large, 90% of them, we have follow through on this, right? You're not going to be perfect all the time.
Yep.
You might have to go 2-3 months so you get feedback on one thing and have to work on it. But if you have to go more than a couple of months, and your brother Jim keeps on showing up to work late and going home early, and he was told, you got to pull your weight, then we got to have a serious conversation within the family that how serious are you about being a farmer? This is not just my wealth. This has taken 5 generations to build up this wealth. We can't just have you taking it over and running it in the ground. You would not hire a CEO to run a business or make any investment in any company that's being ran by a fool.
Right.
Right? So why should your family do that? But the thing is, if you have a son and daughter that over 24 months makes 24 improvements to their character, you don't just have a son and daughter with potential. They're realizing their full potential. They're not going to be perfect, but what you got is a growth mindset. And we as farmers, we are pretty stubborn and we're set in our ways. But if you get to overcome the hump of I'm perfect, you need to change, and you get into a culture where everybody gets serious about personal improvement, your operation is going to be around 30 years from now. And not only that, but all those frustrations And things that make you angry about your siblings and your family, they're not all going to be gone, but it's going to be a hell of a lot different working environment, and farming with family becomes fun again.
So can you do the review the other direction for mom and dad?
You got to.
So how do you approach the first couple of review sessions? Because I would assume there might be some animosity that's been built up over the last couple of years. How do you keep that conversation positive to where it's not a dog pile moment?
Absolutely. Well, I think the thing is that, let me just put it this way. There's my aunt, she married the richest man in her hometown, right? And everybody she thought she was hit the lottery. She found out 5 years into it, the man was a complete jerk to her every day. And he was worth $10 million, and it wasn't worth it. And she divorced him.
Yep.
Well, it's the same thing with farmers. Just because you have a nice farm that's worth $10 million, if you're a jerk to work with every day, who wants to work with you?
Right.
And sadly, a lot of sons and daughters, their dads or family members, their Uncle Bill, Aunt Kathy, they love them, legitimately love them. Mm-hmm. But there is frustrations because of the sense of entitlement. I have the assets. You're going to be lucky to someday get it after I die.
Yeah.
The sense of entitlement is, we have a highest suicide rate. We have the highest suicide, higher than Iraqi and war veterans.
Yeah.
This is effed up, right? This is messed up. And the reason, we got to understand why. And it's a sense of entitlement. And vice versa. There's a lot of sons and daughters. Like I said, a simple example would be showing up late, work late, not putting in the full effort. Here, the mom and dad and grandpa and grandma have worked their butts off all these years to give this opportunity for the next generation because they're that passionate.
Yep.
So what makes sense to me is we do this performance review 360 degrees. But for the first 6 months, out of respect to the senior generation, the sons and daughters do it first by themselves, right? And then usually after a couple months, mom and dad feel comfortable with the process too, right? And they participate and say, it's a sign of respect after 3 months for Uncle Bill to turn around the tables and say, hey, I want to be evaluated too. Mm-hmm. And the first couple critical feedbacks I suggest, I wouldn't go below the belt, right? I would just make the first couple things something they know themselves mm-hmm. that they've got to change. What I'm concerned about,
an obvious one: showing up late, going home early. That's
simple.
Everybody that's around. That's not a below the belt topic.
Yep.
That's this way. Now, if you went into something deeper, something about an individual that was damning, we really could not make this a successful process from the beginning.
Absolutely. And so now, my audiobook is free. Okay, so you can go to www.stubborn.farm to listen about all these concepts. But in that written book, because it just didn't work, I have, just for an audiobook, on the back page of the actual hard copy, I have a pledge. And how I frame it is just to act as a New Year's resolution. I've had a lot of farmers the last few weeks give a copy of this book to their family members and say, I recognize that I have a bad habit. Right? Here's a couple bad habits. Mm-hmm. Just go to the page before that and just list off a couple habits that are common for a lot of families.
Ignoring people. Always being negative.
You missed the first one. That's the best.
Leaving
tools around. Not putting tools back.
No time for family. Needing to be in control. Living an unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
Okay. So, there's just a couple common ones that anybody can pick out. One of those things. For you, and what does it say on the back page there, Corey?
My pledge to start positive changes in our culture.
Yeah.
Has a line to list a bad habit. The next line has to list a new habit, and then how you're going to fix it.
Mm-hmm. And then what's to say at the bottom?
It says, I pledge to become stubborn in a positive way over the next 30 days to make this new habit stick. One condition, read this book Stubborn. If you do, I'll take you and your other partners out for lunch in a month to discuss its concepts. And then you got a lunch date, time, suggested location.
What's it say below
And
that?
it says, I'm serious about catalyzing change by first changing myself. If my partners don't see this habit stick, then I'll tip our server $100. And you sign and date.
I like that.
So the thing is, by you showing the leadership, I see succession planning has always been proud families getting really prideful with each other and saying, I deserve this, I'm entitled. What we got to do is we've got to lead through humility. And by you saying to your family members, okay, I recognize I'm not perfect, but I would like to improve our farming partnership so that we can farm together for the next 30 years. And the first step is for you to, say, hey, I'm going to show up to work on time. And if I don't, I owe a waitress $100. Everybody's going to laugh about that, and they're going to go with you for lunch. And then they're going to have this conversation about this book. Mm-hmm. And that's the simplest way to start a New Year's resolution, whether it's the February 2nd or July 2nd, whenever somebody listens to this podcast. But it's just a simple way to get things going, because the most uncomfortable thing to have is the succession talk. And my attitude is that if you, as a successor over 24 months, make 24 improvements to your character and it's objectively graded, through that process, your parents will actually start to recognize that you're not all bad. And the last thing a father or a mother, a lot of farm patriarchs wants to do is talk about succession. They'd rather talk about funeral arrangements. But if you can kick the can and say, hey, we're going to talk about this 2 years from now, they're going to jump at that opportunity because that gives them 2 years to procrastinate, right? Mm-hmm. But 2 years builds up. And through that process, see, a lot of families, they never sit down to talk about business strategy. Never. First time they ever do that is when they're doing the succession planning. And I've got a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. My boy's Huckleberry, he's 5. Samuel Colt is 4, and then Scout is 2, and then my little boy Stetson Grit, he's just baby a month ago. But the thing is that I know before I take him out to a fancy restaurant, it's going to take me 5 years of me sitting them down at the kitchen table and learning table manners before I can go out, right? I mean, Huckleberry 2 nights ago was dancing naked on the table, farting.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it takes the same thing with a family business. It takes a couple years of us making simple decisions together and learning table etiquette. Most importantly, learning to respect each other and not talk over top of each other, but to actually listen to what your partner's saying, because that's a hard thing to do. Be stubborn, actually listening instead of stubborn with your family. That takes 2 years to do.
Yep.
Having that family meeting is what I do. All I do with the family meetings, we make one improvement, how you guys work together as a team, okay? We make one improvement to each person's character, and then we make one improvement to farm efficiency. And my rule of thumb is that for the first 6 months, it can't cost more than $1,000. Everybody wants to buy a farm next door, wants to buy a combine, then we get into pissing contests.
Yep.
Right? The thing is that if you get, what I'm worried about is a family learning to communicate and learning. I mean, if I had a girl named Darlene, and she did all the homework. They had extra capital in the year because she had done such a good job as a herdsman in that dairy barn. She wanted to put $30,000 into calf barn ventilation. Now this is 15 years ago almost, and her dad said, "No, there's no money for that." And she was pissed. The next day, a $300,000 combine showed up in the yard, and her brother showed up late for chores, as he always did, and her uncle was there, and it was just like kids buying a toy at Christmas. But they had 15% death rate in their calf barn, and that was costing them their best heifers, right? And she says, "There's no money for this, but we only cash crop 600 acres. We don't not need a new combine."
Yeah.
Right? But I said the issue, and she started talking to me about chauvinism. And I said, "Darlene, you're going to be struggling with chauvinism your whole life. Your parents are actually very progressive people. compared to a lot of other families I see. But you got 5,000 years of paradigms. We got to shift here. Mm-hmm. And her mom had actually said, Darlene, you're going to marry your boyfriend and you can go milk. He has twice the many cows as we do, and he's an only child. She says, if Brock wants to come work for me, he can, but I am not leaving this farm. I'm the oldest daughter. I should be able to have the opportunity to farm just the same as my two brothers.
Yeah.
I said, Darlene, the issue isn't chauvinism here. The issue is that you're not respected as an equal partner. You're a milkmaid. Mm-hmm. You're an employee. Even though you have been here for 5 years, they had to build a new milk house to put in a bigger milk tank because you had improved production that much. You're the reason that combine, they can afford the combine. They've never been able to afford a combine before.
Yeah.
But the issue is that you're not involved in decision making. You gave that plan that was well described. It was well researched. You had 3 different quotes from 3 different suppliers. You had the cash flow statement. You had it on balance sheet. Why we needed a new calf barn. The problem was your dad seen it in the milk house. He put it in his pocket and he lost it because you approached him at the wrong time. The other thing is your dad built that calf barn 23 years ago, and he does not want to admit that it's not the perfect calf barn. Because 23 years ago, they had an open house, and 200 people came to it, and it was the showpiece of the county.
Yeah, top of the line at the time.
And what you're saying to your dad is you did it wrong.
Yep.
You know, and we got to get over that stubbornness where people double down on bad decisions. And what you got to do in that situation is you got to get a situation where dad and your grandpa, at the same time as you're coming to the meeting with ideas for improving ventilation, don't talk about ventilation first. Let's talk about a new type of teat dip that's to cost less than $1,000 a change. Let's get you squabbling over that, and you know, and so that when we talk about new ideas, it's not you criticizing what your dad has done in the past. Your dad's at the same time coming to the table with ideas to improve efficiency, and you've got to learn to listen to what he says too. And what you got to get everybody over the hump of is everybody's got to learn to listen to each other and not talk over top of each other. And then you guys got to learn, instead of saying, this is my idea, we're going to do it this way, we got to look at things 5 different ways and look at options. So before we start talking about estate planning, we got to get your family learning to talk about 5 different ways to look at teat dips or calf barn ventilations, different ways we can tweak things and get it to the point so it doesn't matter who's smarter, the smart decision gets made. We got to get rid of this arrogance that we have with our families.
I know there's a lot of our listeners that know that they give out good ideas, but it's not a good idea until Dad comes up with it.
Yeah.
You know, you plant that seed strategically 3 or 4 times, and then as soon
Try
as
to
it's
get it to be
Dad's
their
idea,
idea. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that's true. But the thing is, what is the rate of improvement in your efficiency in your operation?
Nope.
You have so much money slipping between the cracks in your op. There's miscommunication and egos affects a farm's bottom line more than the markets and weather altogether.
So I wanted to go back to your performance review statement.
Yeah.
We encourage our listeners all the time to run their farms more like a business.
Sure.
That's been something we've said from the beginning. And there are more corporations and small businesses that do these performance reviews, but it also works 2 ways, right? It holds that individual accountable for improving and finding ways that they can develop more skills or improve their personal skills.
Yeah.
But after those 2 years, just like you said, Mom and Dad, I want to talk succession planning 2 years from now.
Yeah.
You now have proof as the individual. If you have done these improvements, you now have documented proof as that person to say, look how responsible I am. Look at the dedication I've provided.
And if you just the grain buggy last week, that won't terminate the conversation.
Right. Yep. Yeah, if you've made a mistake in the recent, you've got a longer set of positives to show the effort towards this. It really helps provide a little bit of responsibility proof that you are putting this together. But I know our listeners, and this is probably going to take us on a little bit of a turn, but I know our listeners are concerned, right? So how do we get this started? Why would parents be hesitant to have these conversations?
I think the easiest way to start the conversation is through humility and say, how can I improve myself? because your parents are going to jump on that bandwagon so
which
quickly.
Which is what we're going to do. We've got
Right?
We've got an example of a way that we can spend 2 years improving ourselves. What now?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is just simply to get the process started. If you could say, hey, let's do this for 6 months, and then let's see how it goes. And if your parents after 6 months don't want to make improvements themselves, then we got to have a real conversation. How serious are you about being a partner and friend that you want to be? Do you really want to work with this partner for 30 years? Right? And I think that the lack of growth mindset in agriculture causes so many frustrations, so many family farms to fall apart. And the thing is, whether it's your parents or your Uncle Bill or your sibling, if they're not willing to improve themselves, you've got to ask yourself the question, like, how much do I want to spend the next 30 years working with these people? And then you have, like you said, Tanner, an objective track record. If you've given feedback to your brother, who you love dearly, but he constantly shows up late to work, and it's documented, then he doesn't shift blame or blame you for other reasons. He understands objectively that he didn't meet the mark of anybody would meet for basic understanding. You'd be fired if you work somewhere else, right? And that objectivity, if you have to have a delicate conversation with your sibling, your Uncle Bill, or your parents or your grandparents, if they're not willing to change and improve themselves, then you might have better chances of staying alive 10 years down the road and preventing yourself from having mental health issues if you work somewhere else. But they know that you love farming, but they know objectively why it is you're leaving. And it's not frayed by that argument you had last week about claw hammer. It's objectively because of these factors. And that sense of entitlement, we've got to get rid of in family farms. And if we get rid of the sense of entitlement, we look at the opportunity to work with each other with a sense of humility. It's only through having a sense of humility, right? Getting rid of the arrogance of saying we're the best farmers, we don't need to change. Or the arrogance of, you're just lucky to have me, right? I can be a jerk to you all I want. It's only by getting rid of those two things that we're going to have a family farm successful 30 years down the road.
So this episode, Corey, is about succession planning. It's about communicating, and it's about getting started. But I anticipated the comment that Cajun was going to say about what is a better chance of you being alive 5 years from now. If it's that bad to where you put yourself in a poor mental state. So on the back page of your notes is what ChatGPT did, the back page of your notes. I said, if you avoid succession planning, I asked AI, if you avoid succession planning for your farm or family business, what adverse side effects on mental health can the involved parties have? And this is the list that I like to think it's a she, right? They know everything, women.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Stress and anxiety, interpersonal strain, feelings of uncertainty, already touched on that one. Impact on leadership, already touched on that one. Family dynamics, you refer to the Christmas party, Christmas gatherings, family gatherings, all of that, because I've got a question coming up about that for you as well. Loss of identity and purpose.
Exactly.
You spend all of your life working towards this, and what's it for? That's only half the list.
Right.
My name is Mark Andrew Junkin of Bobcaygeon. I am the 7th generation to farm since 1832. The first white man killed in the county was my ancestor clearing our farm. I grew up thinking that I had a right to farm. I was told that because all my cousins weren't interested in farming. It was mine if I wanted it. I went to college. The year that I went to college, 18 herds of cattle left my county because nobody seen a future in farming. My high school principal and my guidance counselor said, do not go to agriculture college. You're too smart. You can go do something else. I took up continuing 7th-generation tradition. Years later, I sat on my barn beam with a rope around my neck on my birthday. And I had said to my family for over 10 years, if we don't get this done by my birthday, I'm hanging myself. I know what it's like to be in that state. And only by the grace of God did I get a different life mission in that moment. Because I thought my purpose in life was to farm in Bobcaygeon, continue your 7th-generation tradition. But my purpose, I've never been back to Bobcaygeon since. And my life goal is to make sure nobody gets in the same spot. And the only way we can do that, what caused my family to be successful in farming that land, 5 miles north of where I'm from, the corn does not grow. It is stony soil. What caused my family to be successful farming in Bobcaygeon for 7 generations is the fact that we were stubborn. What caused my family to fall apart is the fact that we were stubborn. And I'm hell-bent to turn the word stubborn from a bad thing to a good thing for family farms.
Yeah. And it's not that we think everybody listening to this episode is going to be in a position with those poor thoughts. But it can be as simple as being unhappy.
There's nobody would have guessed that. I wouldn't have guessed it. 25 years ago, I would have said, everything we're talking about today is BS. I dated a girl taking a psychology degree and said it was absolutely useless, right? All this, what we're talking about, this wishy-washy stuff, is the soft issues which become hard problems in farming. And it just catches up on us. And I think that the key thing is we've got to stop being stubborn with each other.
Right. How many times do you run when you're talking to families and you're going through this process, do you find that, maybe there's multiple siblings that want to come back to the farm that maybe one or multiple don't actually want to be there? Like you're not on the farm anymore. Your success story might have came through a terrible way to get it, but look at where you're at now. It's okay to not farm, to not go back to the farm. Do you think some of these kids just want to come back to farm because that's what they were groomed to do? But maybe they are meant for something else?
That's a good word.
That is a very good, to carry on, to make your parents happy. There's a lot of guys that do that.
And maybe it's not even parents. Maybe it's just the
guys
only
and
thing they
gals.
know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy. I mean, I just dealt with a guy two days ago. I mean, in his situation, his family was one of the wealthiest farmers in the county, several counties actually. And it was easier for him than going off and doing something else.
Yep.
It's only through a performance review that you find out about yourself, like, do I actually like this or not?
Yeah.
That's a starting point. But I think the first piece of land a farmer should buy is not the home farm, it's not the neighbors next door. The first piece of land a farmer should buy is that little cemetery 2 miles down the road. I might have talked about this last podcast here. I've talked about it on podcasts before, but this is the most important. I just did this 2 days ago. There's two brothers. They freaking hated each other. They loved each other, but they hated each other.
Yep.
Right? And I got them to buy cemeteries. That I was about 4 miles down the road from their farm. And I got them to buy a grave plot beside each other. And my question to them is that how do we make sure, we don't know how long we got on this earth, but what do I want to do with my life between now and then? And how do we do it together? And we take on the world and we farm, we're stewards of the land for the 10 miles around this little cemetery. And how do we do this together so that you're not only going to be buried for hundreds of years beside each other, 5 feet from each other? How do we make sure that the next 30 years we want to be 5 feet from each other when we're alive? And and that starts with you asking yourself, am I the partner and friend anybody would want to work with? And when you get in the mindset of being 5 feet from each other at a gravesite and ask yourself, what have I got to do day to day in order for us to be able to accomplish what we want to do between now and then, and for us to all be taking on the world together instead of each other? It changes every decision you make. When you make decisions instead of the short-term, emotional, what makes me feel good in the moment, that has catastrophic. My dad plowed down my crops, right? He did that for short-term win that day. He wasn't thinking about the long-term of us being buried beside each other. He didn't figure about the fact that how it would impact generations of our family never farming that land again, right? But for brothers, or father and grandfather, to be thinking, making all the decisions, not what's in it for me, but how do we take on the world together? How does our family dynasty, how do we set this up so our great-grandkids can farm this land? It changes every other decision in place. And if you find out, hey, I want to go be a gear hairstylist, but I'm just not want to tell my family that, that's fine too. But by you buying that cemetery plot, you'll come to that realization. Mm-hmm. And your family will love you no matter what.
You know, you made me think of something when you said that there's a lot of kids, I'm going to say kids for lack of a better term, a lot of generations that work to make their parents happy.
Yeah.
It's that desire that almost you want what you can't have, because we know that some generations struggle to say they're proud, to say good job, to say these things. And how much of that is a mental battle of, if you wanted the hot girl that's out of your league and you went after her and went after her and went after her knowing that you can't ever get it, the chase. How much of what our listeners are doing today is the chase of maybe someday?
The chase of being a farmer?
Right. Being able to make your own decisions.
I think by you understanding your purpose in life, instead of your dad deciding that for you or deciding what you do day to day, you set goals for yourself that are tough to attain. One of the first things I do when I work with a family, usually a lot of farms, the son will show up to the shop, maybe a little bit late. And then I remember one guy referring to his dad as a walking task list, right? What am I going to do the rest of the day? And he tries to get through that stuff. Maybe some things don't get done, and he sloughs off early. He's got a slave's mentality. You got to take ownership of your time. And the first thing I do when I work with a family is I get the successors to invest their time like their money. And so at the beginning of the week, we get the family looking at how they invest their time collectively. So I'm about to put 60 hours into this business over the next week. My grandpa might only put in 20 because he's getting older.
Yep.
But he's putting in his time, but he's putting in his capital. We got to look at not just the investment of capital in the operation. We got to look at the investment in time. But when you have a successor, he sets goals for himself as to what he wants to get done by tomorrow night. And he communicates with his family members, okay, I got to be out here by 4:30 because I got to take my kids figure skating. But he sets goals for himself what he wants to get accomplished before that time. He stops being a slave and being an owner. And I want 2 years, and you have to have an agreement within the family that this is a priority for you to do tomorrow. For you might have a disagreement with your uncle, Bill, cutting the lawn and where he should be doing the bookkeeping. For you guys to get good at agreeing on priorities, on little things like time. If you have 365 days that you can disagree on how you invest your time, then when it comes to talking about doing a barn expansion or doing succession planning or anything strategic, you learn to disagree respectfully. But more importantly, it's not my time. These are my priorities. It's our priorities happening on this farm. We're putting 80% effort in the 20% of things that really matter, both in our personal lives, because I really get into personal lives as well. What are you doing? Are you watching TV or are you playing with your kids on the floor, right? When you're complaining about not having enough family time, are you investing your time like it's money at home, right? Because the quality of the relationship your brother has with his kids is going to impact the farm 30 years down the road if the kid's not is a dysfunctional person because your brother didn't spend time with him because he was in the barn too much. So, but the thing is overall is that building self-esteem is done by somebody being an owner of their time, not somebody else's slave. And that's by you guys working together as a family to agree on priorities on how you invest your time and get results in the farm.
Okay, so we've attacked a way to lead into these meetings with the personal review. We've attacked what can happen once we have these meetings and have the conversations around identifying priorities, making decisions together without egos. But now I want to cover kind of what Corey was talking about, multiple siblings. What's your advice for the difference between fair and equal? Because that's
the first time I ever got asked that question.
First time ever?
I'm joking. Everybody wants to know. So
But I mean, it's going to be an ongoing issue for 90% of our listeners, right? You've got a kid on the farm who has two siblings who aren't on the farm.
Sure.
You've got a kid on the farm and one sibling actually comes back during harvest, but it moves on. When you make a succession plan, those decisions have to be made.
Yeah.
To an extent, for it to be clear and outlined. How?
Well, I think the thing is that, to me, what makes sense, and this just is my opinion, what I'm mostly concerned about is getting the family to the point that they can have an intelligent conversation about this without it being a pissing contest, right? Without everybody butting heads and saying I'm smarter than you, because that is the root evil of everything. But this is just my personal opinion, is there's a day when everybody leaves the farm to go off to college and university. And my friend, in 1993, the farm he was on, they had 1,000 acres. It was worth $3,000 an acre. To me, that would be this date that if he had not come home and basically saved the farm because his dad had cancer, that farm would have been sold, and there'd be very little left for the state of the kids. So to me, it would make sense. Let's say that farm was worth $5 million that day. Okay, when the parents die, the estate is worth $5 million. Now, I've taken this business from $5 million to $20 million. You got to have an agreement with your parents as to, I mean, obviously they put some work into the operation, so their time should count for something, but you have to have that discussion what that proportion is. But to me, it would make sense is that you have an agreement from the time 1993 to 2000, what percentage did I earn? And I think the key thing is earning. I don't think that not entitled. And to me, it would make sense to have it crystal clear so that you have an understanding, okay, this is the farm was worth $5 million. Therefore, I owe my siblings that are not farming $5 million over the next 30 years. And this is a way my kids and my grandkids can cash flow this over the next 30 years. Even if I'm not still alive, I still owe this to my siblings. And that's a great way for your parents to know that your sister in California who cannot manage her money is going to make sure that her bills are going to be paid for the rest of her life, because the farm is always going to be able to cash flow it. And you know that because you just spent the last 2 years taking a successor with potential to having realizing full potential, getting the values that made the farm successful to the point that we know that those values are being passed on, not just assets, but values. So we know the farm is still going to be growing and growing 30 years down the road. And that, to me, is most important before we have that conversation, so that everybody has the confidence. Your sister in California, if she thinks the farm's going to be tits up in 5 years' time because you're a poor manager, she is not going to want to invest in you. You got to spend 2 years first proving to her through a performance review, through improving your character, that you're somebody worthy of anybody to invest in. So she has confidence to keep money in the farm. And then if that's the case, then you can cash flow things. And more importantly, you're not encumbering your debt. Like if you're in a situation where you have 4 siblings and one sibling's farming, but that one sibling shows up late to work, those 3 other siblings want to get their money out of the farm because they don't trust in its future, right? You got to first of all prove to them that keeping the money in this business is better investment than the Dow Jones. And if they trust you more than they trust these shysters in New York, then that succession planning conversation will be successful.
I hadn't thought about it that way. There's a lot of the conversations that we get is, okay, siblings ended up with the ground and now they're my landlords.
Yep.
And then they rented it to somebody else.
And that's a different way to go about it.
Well, but that's just like you said. If you work on that relationship with your siblings before that point, and you've got their trust and you've got their buy-in, you don't have to worry about them renting it to somewhere else because they already know that you're the best option for them.
You got to earn their trust. And that's by you not having an attitude of entitlement, but humility, and trying to become the best man or best woman you can be, both in your person. I mean, Your siblings might not like your sister, your wife, because you guys have a dysfunctional relationship, so they don't want to keep the money in the farm for that reason. Big part of what I do is not only get an improvement in the character of the farmer at business, but at home too. If you've got 24 improvements to a marriage over the next 24 months, your siblings, whether they like your wife or not, know that you're on solid ground.
Yeah. The in-laws is you don't get to choose those. Well, you don't get to choose. Well, maybe your brother or sister does, but you don't get to choose those. You don't get to choose family. So,
I think the thing is, we often throw the baby out with the bathwater, and just because a person comes from a different background, has different values in your family, your sibling, unless made decisions based on their buttocks, your sibling married that person for a reason. That person has potential. It's just a matter of them realizing their full potential. And I want to see that. I mean, a lot of spouses buy into this process as well. Seeing my wife and I do this within our own marriage. Every month we have it written down as to one thing that we're working on. And it's done wonders for our marriage. And it will, I mean, your siblings, for them to know that your marriage is on rock solid ground, not quicksand, they're wanting to be business partners with you because of that. And I think the thing is that overall is we got to stop looking at this as a shotgun wedding or arranged marriage. But this, in the same way, we got to look at being in a business partnership with our siblings and our family as a marriage. It's not a one-night stand. When my grandpa farmed with my dad, my grandpa retired within a couple of years because he had health issues, right? And gave the farm to my dad, right? It's not like high school sweethearts. This is a long-term relationship, and we got to start treating it as, stop being stubborn with each other and being stubborn at turning our weaknesses into strengths. So we're the partner and friend anybody would want to farm with or live with for the next 40 years. And that's how we talk about corporate farms. We say we're family farms. Too often when it comes down to it, as you said at the beginning, everybody looks out for number one. Everybody looks out for greed.
But you said that was number 10.
Well, that's the thing, is because we lose perspective of what the family farm is all about. And what the family farm is all, through this process, you actually become a family. You actually become, your relationship with your partner becomes as important as your relationship with your spouse. And making each other happy is a positive side effect. And it's hard to put quantitative value on that. But it affects the business profitability. If you guys have a good relationship, you're able to make better quality decision making. It skyrockets farm profitability. Mm-hmm. More importantly, farming with family is fun again, and you actually want to be there. You're willing to make sacrifices in order to do what's right for your partners.
I know families that don't get together for holidays anymore. They're cousins. The next generation does their own gathering because the generation above ended up in an issue. But as we kind of wrap this conversation,
that's because they're the wrong type of stubborn.
Yeah, correct. And I love how we're going towards being stubborn in a positive way.
Exactly.
The last two things on that whole list that AI gave us was regret and resentment and health consequences. It's a whole bunch of things there that'll be in the show notes, but it's true that regret and resentment is going to go a long, long ways. I know you always have more questions.
I don't even know where to start. I wrote stuff down. Like, I wanted to dive deeper into ownership, and it's an identity, I think you said, and like.
Well, Casey's at Crossroad. We'll go get a beer.
Yeah. But it's just like, man, there's so many different things to get into here.
Well, let me cover what we did talk about.
Yeah.
Right. So we talked about making sure that we did this process for clarity and commitment. We need to have recognition and security, because if you don't get recognition and insecurity, you don't have ownership and you don't have identity. Mm-hmm. We covered that. We talked about how 77% of farms don't have a plan in place, and one of the major changes between the past and now is that farmers are living longer. Yep. So this is becoming more of an issue for a longer period of time. It's not high school sweethearts. This is a long-term commitment because everybody lives longer. We talked about the way to put together a performance plan for individuals and for the farm by adopting humility to come into those with an open approach to actually want to be better both as a person and as an organization. The 9,000-hour review, using performance reviews like a business that provides proof, gives you a concept, gives you something that you can continue to work with. Be supportive in the first couple of meetings. Don't go below the belt when you're putting this together. We want to make sure that we discover what the priority is for the farm and for the business, as well as what our purpose is as individuals. We don't just live to make our family and parents happy and proud, although those are things that are great because we want things to be earned and not because of entitlement. We want to prove that we can take care of the operation through the quality of relationships that we maintain. And the key things that I put down here is, am I a partner or a friend that people want to be with? Making sure I take care of the soft issues before they become hard problems. And lastly, be stubborn in a positive way.
Yeah.
You did good there.
I think you did great.
We covered a lot.
He did. Cajun covered a lot. We just
Absolutely.
have to sit back and let him go.
This is an hour, and the thing is, my audiobook's only 2 hours and 2 hours and 45 minutes. So if you go to www.stubborn.farm, 3 minutes from now you can be listening to the audiobook. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. We'll send you the links, and it's free. And you can not only listen to it yourself, but if you like it, you could share it with your brother, even though you probably aren't talking this week. You could share it with your siblings, even your aunt that you sometimes have difficulty talking to, and you could change things by next Christmas.
Yeah. After your current On Farm for Profit podcast.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
What? So I mean, www.stubborn.farm.
Yep.
What? And they listen to your book and they decide they want to do something. You got to make some money somehow. Where do you come into the picture? How do they get a hold of you?
I do Zoom meetings.
Yep.
So, what happened was 16 years ago, I wrote that book, and I started getting calls from all across from North America. And there was one time I was in the Midwest, and I just got back to my little apartment in Ontario. I walked in the door, and somebody from Missouri called me, and I helped him over Zoom. And I found that I was able to have short, sweet, little half-hour meetings, and I did 10 times better job than the farms I go out to for a day.
Yep.
And so that's how I function, is I just meet with families once a month. I do it for Zoom. I have farms in Prince Edward Island. I have farms in Western Canada, British Columbia. I have farms down in Mississippi. I even started working with, because of this podcast, I got somebody in England contacted me, and I've helped them out, as well as South Africa. Your program actually has worldwide reach. It's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is that, Zoom technology just makes, I love having pie with people. I love petting your dog. I like to,
Yeah.
But the thing is that if you can have short, little improvements every month, you can keep things cost effective, and more importantly, little short changes make big improvements over 2 years.
Yep.
So as you're thinking about the challenge, to wrap this up for our listeners, we ask all of our guests the same question. The question that we're asking at this point in time is, for you personally, how best do you learn something new? As you go about a new skill, a new technique, a new good habit,
Yeah.
for you, what has made it a successful way to learn that?
Beside my bathtub, I have on the wall, I have a rule that I have to be there by 4:03 in the morning. And I'm not allowed to get out of that bathtub until I've read 75 pages. And so that's how I start my day, every day for the last 15 years. And because 4:03 was when a farmer, there was a situation where a farmer was suicidal. And after that moment, I thought I knew it all about succession planning, and I realized I knew nothing. And I still know nothing. But I'm learning a little bit more and more every day. And so I think that's how I learn. But more importantly, I learned so much from the farmers they think I'm helping them. So much about my marriage and the success of my marriage is because of what I learned from really good men.
So you've discovered motivation. You found something that
Discipline
motivates
equals
you.
freedom.
Yep.
Discipline equals freedom, to quote Jocko. Hope Jocko's next podcast I'm on.
Wouldn't that be great?
We need to have him on. We've heard him talk.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey.
My challenge is to think about your farm, think about this succession planning, whether you're on maybe the elderly side with children coming back, maybe you're one of the children wanting to go back, and think just about one of the small things that Cajun talks about. What could you improve? And then let's start having that conversation. I know after we talked our first time, we started having monthly meetings.
Awesome.
And I am the first to admit it has not taken place every month.
Yeah.
It
Sometimes you need a babysitter
you
for a couple
get into
months in order to
those
get the habits. That's what I do.
harvest situations
Yeah.
or whatever. But get back into that, and then most importantly, go to www.stubborn.farm. Do not go to .com. You might not like what you find there, and maybe you would. Tanner'd probably like it. www.stubborn.farm and free audiobook, and I am going to do that because clearly I can't read. So
right.
I'm going to use the audiobook.
It's all good.
That's right.
So
Well, Cajun, this was a pleasure.
Hey, it was
I
great meeting
appreciate
y'all.
you wanting to come and do this in person. I
don't
think
get off
there's
the
a lot
farm
of
much,
value out of
so
this.
it's great to be here to meet you
Yeah.
guys. Yeah.
yep.
Awesome.
So
Yeah, you're one of the
listeners,
first 5 people
Yeah.
probably
It's
that
pretty-
we've had in
it's
here.
pretty fancy digs you
It's
have
fresh.
here.
It's fresh, and the next time you're here, it'll look way different, I'm sure. So
that's pretty cool.
yeah. Yep. So
Well, that's great. Listeners, we appreciate you hanging around for this whole show. Hopefully you found some value, and if so, we hope to see you next time.